So the example I'm looking at is not a traditional network example, but it does have a really important application in just shaping our physical environment. So you as a person who lives somewhere, whether it's a space that you're renting or a space that you're borrowing from your parents or your own house, whatever the case is, we can use these sorts of thoughts, these ways of structuring our understanding about our space to help us to make better decisions about how to use and shape that space. So here's a favorite book of mine, A Pattern Language by a bunch of names I'm not going to pronounce. This is a book that's kind of about home design. It's kind of about urban planning. It's kind of about a lot of different things. I really don't know what urban planners or architects think about this, but just as someone who uh, lives in a physical reality, I really like the basic philosophy underlying this. So this is sort of a normative aesthetic claim that I'm making. But one thing that really struck me in here is the way they think about moving through your space, which is exactly like what we're talking about here. Now, they don't use the formal structure of nodes and edges, but they've got these ideas about you move through a space to dead ends. You want private rooms to be in dead ends. You certainly wouldn't want this space to be a bedroom because it's right by the front door. 50 years ago, I think it actually was a bedroom. This is a very old house that's gone through many iterations. And this particular room has always been kind of funny because on the one hand, it's right by the front door, but on the other hand, it's a little bit far away from the kitchen. Uh, there's this bend which kind of adds that little bit of separation that seems to make all the difference in just how we prefer to use it. Um, Another thing is at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, I was using the living room for my office. But that was a bit of a hassle because the kitchen draws a lot of energy. Right? Moving all the way up here means I've got all this space between me and the rest of the house, which means that if I'm recording a video and my partner comes home, it doesn't have to be disruptive, right? So by exploiting that long and costly path length, I'm getting better use out of my space. There's a nice little illustration in here also of a couple's realm, right? So this is sort of applying some sociology to this thought of design. You want, I love this, you want to be psychologically far from the children, right? And likewise, you want the children to kind of have their space that branches off the house. And, similar patterns are applying to this at the level of cities and all these other things. This is a fun little book. I don't know how valid it is, but hey, it's low cost for me. All right, so again, thinking of the house as a network, we've got a pictorial representation, and that works for something relatively simple like a house. But if we're thinking about, say, all the people on Twitter, well, then we need the computer to do the hard work for us because we just can't. There's just no way. So the two basic ways that we could do this is we could have a list of edges, which is just representing every single connection here. So we've got a connection from 1 to 2, and of course we also have a connection from 2 to 1. Right? We could say that this is different than this. That would be a directed network. I'm going to be lazy. In this case, I'm going to think of it as an undirected network. So this connection is exactly the same as the other direction. Although actually in practice we got painting stuff and bicycles and stuff just piled up. It's a little bit easier to go one way than it is the other. But we'll assume a can opener here. So we got 1, 2. We've got 1, 3. 3 goes to 5. Sorry, to 4. 3 goes to 4, 3 goes to 6, 6 goes to 7, 5 goes to 4. I think that's all the ones downstairs. I'm not going to go through this exhaustively. You can fill in the blanks for these other ones. Now the adjacency matrix Now, the advantage of an edge list is you're literally only writing down what's there. But for this, we're going to have a whole bunch of things that we're writing down that aren't there, which we'll represent with zeros. Right? So we can say from 1 to 1, I guess we could call that a 0. We could call it a 1. Let's call it a 1, right? Because if you're there, you're already there. Actually, let's call it a 1. We'll call it a 1. There are a number of ways we might do this, and the decision we'd make would depend on what we're trying to achieve. But from 1 to 2, we can certainly put an M in there. That makes sense, right? And it's the same in this corner here, right? 1 to 2, 2 to 1, same difference. Now again, we could think of this as directed, so we could say this is from this row to this column, in which case going from 2 to 1, if that's easier than 1 to 2, we would have numbers reflecting that here. So what we're basically going to do to fill this out, let's find an H from 6 to 8. Right? So we find row 6 down to column 8. We're going to have an H. But from row 6, node 6, we can't directly get to 1, so we might put a 0, right? Or we might put an X or a null or an NA or some representation to illustrate that there is no connection. Right? And actually, I think if I was going to put this into R, I would call this a 0 and this an NA. Right? There's also no 6 to 2. Actually, for the entire 2 column, we only have that 1. So if we call all of these NAs, not applicable. Right? That's what's going on there. Or if we're really just not even concerned with those weights, we only want to know, is there a connection at all? We could say, well, from 9 to 10, we have a 1. From 9 to 8, we have a 1. From 9 to 9, well, that's itself. Maybe we put an NA there, maybe. Or maybe we put a -1 or something like that, some indication that it is itself. Or maybe we just tell R, don't even worry about it when we're looking at the diagonal. It doesn't matter what we put in there. But we got 1s for those, and then we'll have 0s for all the others, right? Or maybe we just think of, yeah, let's make it a positive one. I think that makes sense. So there are decisions to be made. There is no one correct way to fill out this adjacency matrix, except for the fact that the row column matchup should have information reflecting the connection of those 2 nodes in the actual network. So 1 is connected to 1. We could think that as 0 or an NA or a positive 1. These connections between, say, 1 and 2, we could think of that as M, representing a medium level of difficulty traversing, right? Or it might be a medium level of connection, depending on the network, right? It could be any number of things. Now, this, as you can see, is going to be a lot of numbers to fill out. 14 squared. Well, let's see. We're going to have 100 here. That's plus 80. And then what's this? 4 times 4 is 16. So we're going to have 196 squares to calculate just for the 14 nodes that I'm denoting in my home. And I didn't even break it down as complicated as I could. I might have added, 5A over here to represent the fact that my living room is pretty big. So getting from the kitchen to the back door is actually not really as simple as just stepping through a doorway. So I do that. I'm going to be adding, how many calculations have I got to add? I've got to add a whole nother column. That means 14 new numbers to fill in. I'm going to add a row. That's another 14 numbers. And then that last one doesn't really matter. But it's still something that I have to have the computer represent. This is convenient for a lot of purposes. It's easier to do math on this. Right? So you could represent this as, here's adjacency matrix A, and then we can compare that to some vector V, and we can get some answer to our problem. The mathematics of this are incredibly convenient, but the cost is you're using a lot of space, right? And if we're thinking about, say, all the users on Twitter, what have you got? There's like a billion people. That's a billion rows, a billion columns. You're going to crash your computer just loading that in. That's difficult to deal with. Whereas the edge list, especially for this network, where it's very sparse, this is just minimizing how much we need to keep in that representation, right? So this is going to be a little easier on how much of our hard drive do we use when we're getting the computer to do that difficult work. So what have we seen? Let me wrap this up. We're looking at a specific example of physical space as a network. So I drew at my home. I added in some edge weights in a really rough manner, right? So this is really just a qualitative description of it's easy to get from the foyer to the nook. It's a little harder to get from the foyer to the front room, right? Getting up the stairs is hard, certainly compared to either of those other two. So we've got the network as a picture, right? We've graphed it out. And that's fine for small networks, but small networks, if they're small enough that you can draw them, they're probably also kind of small enough that you can really understand them without having to do network science, without having to do a lot of analysis. I'm simplifying there, but if it's simple enough that you can put it here, you can probably wrap your head around the problem. But if it is so complicated that you require, especially something like an edge list, just to manage all that information, that structure might be really important, and you want to set it up in a way where you can do analysis on it, where you can calculate some measures about, say, how important is the breakfast nook in terms of the structure of the network, not thinking about what is its function, right? Can we figure out the centrality of the kitchen? Is the kitchen more central than the breakfast nook for whatever reason, right? And of course, you can think about adding features onto this, adding more information than just these links, but maybe something special about node 4, right? We have to go there because that's where the coffee is. In any case, pictorial representation, a representation of all the links between different nodes, and a matrix representation, which is just a table showing connections between different nodes and potentially also embedding some extra information. These are ways that we can represent networks, and this is a nice easy example that I'd recommend you doing for your own home. Or if you're thinking about, you're just daydreaming, you want to think about what does my dream home look like? Or how would I change this structure if I could? You can think about what might you do to adjust this, to add different nodes, to add different edges. Would it be nice to be able to get from the loft to the bathroom? I think yes, right? So as an exercise, think about your dream home in a network structure. All right, as always, if you've got any questions, let me know in the usual channels.